September 11, 1944, near Kassel, Germany. The clouds were scattered and the sky was open, too open. Captain Klaus Schumacher of the Luftwaffe scanned the horizon from the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf 109. Below, columns of black smoke clawed their way into the heavens from the ruins of yet another bombed-out German city. Above, silence reigned until it didn't. At 23 years old, Klaus was already an ace with over 60 confirmed kills. Decorated, confident, and, by many accounts, arrogant, he had come to believe in the myth of German invincibility in the skies. That day, he spotted what he thought was a gift from the heavens. A lone American fighter, limping in the distance, its fuselage riddled with rust-colored scarring, its movements sluggish and uncertain. Klaus radioed to his wingman. "Look at that old wreck. One shot, and it's done," he laughed. But less than 60 seconds later, Klaus Schumacher would be spiraling toward the ground in a ball of flame, shot down by the very plane he'd mocked. This story, obscure, ironic, and tragically poetic, is a microcosm of a war that rewrote the rules of air combat. But to understand what really happened in the skies above Kassel, and why a rusty American fighter was able to outfly one of Germany's best, we need to go back, not just to the war, but to the shifting nature of pride, strategy, and technology. In 1939, the Luftwaffe entered Dogfights as the most formidable air force in the world. German engineering had created deadly tools like the Bf 109, which dominated the skies over Poland, France, and early campaigns. But as the war dragged on, and as Hitler's ambitions outpaced his resources, cracks began to show. In contrast, the American strategy emphasized quantity and reliability over flashy design. Planes like the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-51 Mustang didn't always look modern or elegant, but they were fast, durable, and lethal. And by 1944, the Allies were no longer on the defensive. Operation Point Blank was in full swing, an all-out aerial assault on German industry and infrastructure. The skies over Europe had become deadly chessboards. American bomber groups would launch daytime raids deep into enemy territory, escorted by long-range fighters designed to protect them from the Luftwaffe's onslaught. The most famous of these was the North American P-51 Mustang, a fighter that didn't look like much, especially to Luftwaffe pilots trained to hunt weak stragglers. Its design was lean, understated, and even outdated-looking to the untrained eye. But inside that rusty frame was a monster. The Mustang, equipped with a British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, could climb faster, fly farther, and maneuver tighter than almost any fighter of its time. It was the quiet killer of the skies. Klaus Schumacher, like many German pilots at that time, had never seen the P-51 up close. Luftwaffe intelligence had underestimated its capabilities. According to post-war interviews, German pilots often mistook the P-51 for older aircraft like the P-40 Warhawk, which by 1944 were mostly retired from frontline duty. That mistake would prove fatal. On the morning of September 11th, a formation of B-17 flying fortresses left bases in England and headed toward the Fieseler aircraft plant near Kassel. The mission: destroy one of Germany's last remaining aircraft production lines. Flying top cover for the bombers was the 357th Breventh Fighter Group, nicknamed the Yoxford Boys. Among them was Lieutenant Clarence "Bud" Anderson, a 22-year-old American pilot with nerves of steel and a Mustang he called Old Crow. Bud had already earned a reputation as a disciplined and deadly flyer. He never broke formation without cause. But when radar picked up German fighters approaching from the east, his squadron dove in unison. Below them, Klaus Schumacher had broken from a defensive patrol and was climbing rapidly. From his vantage point, Bud's plane looked damaged, perhaps hit during the earlier bomb run. Klaus went in for the kill. The Mustang dipped low, playing the wounded bird. Klaus closed in. 600 meters. 400. Then, without warning, Old Crow rolled hard left, cut power briefly, and slipped into a tight banking turn that most German fighters couldn't match without stalling. It was a classic high-side guns defense move, but faster, tighter, and more precise than Klaus had anticipated. Bud had used the Mustang's superior aerodynamics and power-to-weight ratio to lure Klaus into a trap. In a split second, the hunter became the hunted. Bud pulled in behind Klaus's tail and opened fire. The .50 caliber Brownings ripped through the Messerschmitt's fuselage. Oil streamed out, smoke followed, and then flame. Klaus tried to bail, but his parachute snagged. His final words, picked up faintly by radio, were simply, "Impossible." The wreckage of his plane was later recovered near a farming village south of Kassel. His body was buried in a makeshift grave by local residents before being moved years later to a military cemetery. Bud Anderson would go on to complete over 100 missions without ever being hit by enemy fire. The victory over Klaus was just one of 16 confirmed kills he scored during the war. In interviews decades later, Bud never gloated. When asked about Klaus, he said, "He was a good pilot. He made one mistake. He underestimated us." That moment wasn't just about a dogfight. It was about what the war had become by 1944, a grinding contest of adaptation. Germany had started the war with innovation, but by 1944 they were stretched thin, relying on younger, poorly trained pilots and outnumbered planes. The Americans, once mocked for being inexperienced and industrial, had become tacticians in the skies. And yet, even with victories like this, the cost of the air war was staggering. Between 1939 and 1945, the Luftwaffe lost over 75,000 aircraft. The Allies lost even more, nearly 100,000. Thousands of pilots, many in their early 20s, never returned home. Each dogfight, each kill, each victory, no matter how legendary, was bathed in human loss. For every Klaus, there was a mother who never got a letter. For every Bud, a comrade lost in the next mission. War is cruel like that. It lifts heroes and buries them within the same breath. But what made this encounter so powerful wasn't just the irony. It was the symbolism. A German ace, confident in his superiority, taken down by what he perceived as a weak machine. It's a story that reflects a greater truth. Arrogance can be deadlier than bullets. Technological edge alone doesn't win wars. Strategy, adaptation, humility, and grit do. The P-51 Mustang, now considered one of the greatest fighter planes in history, was underestimated at first, much like the young American airmen who flew them. By the end of the war, those same Mustangs were escorting bombers into the heart of Berlin, providing top cover as Hitler's regime collapsed from within. There are many other stories like Bud Anderson's, unsung heroes who flew under fire, outnumbered and outgunned. There's Captain William Dixie Sloan, who once took on 7 Focke-Wulfs and lived to tell the tale, or Chuck Yeager, who shot down a German jet in a propeller-driven plane. These were men who knew the odds and flew anyway. They didn't fly for glory. They flew for each other, for the crews in the bombers, for the kids in London shelters, for the chance that someday the world could know peace again. And what about Klaus Schumacher? He wasn't a villain. He was a product of a nation at war, trained to believe in his aircraft and his superiority. In another world, in another time, perhaps he and Bud would have shared a drink in a pilot's bar, debating the turn radius of a Mustang versus a Messerschmitt. But war doesn't allow those alternate endings. War writes its own. After the war, Bud Anderson returned home, married, raised a family, and continued flying. He eventually became a test pilot and remained active in aviation into his 90s. In 2022, at the age of 100, he was officially promoted to Brigadier General by the U.S. Air Force, a living legend. When asked about his secret to survival, he simply said, "Stay alert, stay humble, fly smart." It's advice that could have saved Klaus. had he heard it, but he didn't. And therein lies the lesson. History is full of moments where pride meets consequence, where laughter becomes silence, and where myths are broken in the blink of an eye. The skies over Germany in 1944 were filled with such moments, moments that teach us, again and again, that underestimating your enemy is the first step toward defeat. Klaus Schumacher's last flight is not just a story of irony. It's a story of how quickly the tide can turn when you fail to read the battlefield, when you trust appearances over reality, and when you forget that war, above all, punishes certainty. If there's one thing to take away from this encounter, let it be this: history is not a straight line. It is made of shattered expectations, silent heroes, and painful reckonings. The skies that once burned with fire now hold the memories of men who lived and died in split-second decisions. It's our job, yours, mine, all of us, to remember those moments not as distant legends, but as urgent warnings. The laughter of a pilot, the glint of a plane, the roar of a machine gun, all gone in seconds, yet echoing across generations, because history only repeats when we forget its cost. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, true, raw, and unforgettable. And remember, sometimes the quietest planes make the loudest impact.